Have you ever noticed how saying yes too often becomes second nature? So much so that you forget you ever had the option to say no? Maybe it started with small favors for family, letting someone interrupt your rest because they needed you, or biting your tongue during conversations to avoid conflict. Over the years, these little choices become habits, and before long, it feels like your peace depends on keeping everyone else happy except yourself. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Many of us grew up believing that being kind means being selfless, always putting others first. But as we get older, that belief can quietly wear us down. It can lead to burnout, resentment, and even sadness we can't quite explain. We start wondering why people don't treat us with the same care we give them. We feel invisible. But here's the truth that no one tells you. Sometimes the problem isn't your kindness. It's that you've been giving it to the wrong people. Today, I want to talk to you about what happens when you stop being nice to those who never truly appreciated it. And no, this isn't about becoming mean or selfish. It's about reclaiming your peace, your energy, and your self-respect. You see, kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's self-abandonment. And once you stop living for the comfort of others, your life starts to feel like your own again. Let's begin by looking at the very first thing that happens. People begin to show you who they really are. When you're always agreeable, always available, people tend to praise you. You're called the good friend, the dependable one, the sweetheart. But the moment you say, "I can't," or "I need time for myself," the warmth fades. That friendly voice may grow cold. They might say things like, "You've changed," or "What's gotten into you?" I knew a woman once, let's call her Laura. For most of her life, Laura was the go-to person in her family and community. Need help with groceries? Call Laura. Need a ride to the doctor? Laura will drop everything. For years, she gave and gave. But inside, she was exhausted. One day, she decided to say no. Not in anger, just with quiet clarity. She didn't explain herself. She simply said, "I'm not able to do that today." And the reaction? Some folks respected her more, but others? They got distant. One relative even said, "You're not who you used to be." That's when it hit her. They hadn't loved her for who she was. They had loved her for what she gave. And when the giving stopped, so did their affection. Now here's something I want you to remember. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. The moment you set a boundary and someone reacts with guilt trips, cold shoulders, or subtle jabs, that's not love being lost. That's convenience being interrupted. And the truth is, you haven't lost a relationship. You've let go of a performance. One that required you to always be quiet, always be small, always give in. And that's not love. That's control. Now let's talk about what happens next. Something even more powerful. You begin to take back your power. For many of us, we don't even realize how much control we've handed over. When you constantly say yes just to avoid upsetting someone, you're not just being nice. You're letting someone else steer your life. Their feelings become your compass. Their expectations decide your schedule. And slowly, without meaning to, you become a shadow of who you used to be. There's a man I knew. We'll call him David. He was a kind soul, always helping others, always saying, "Don't worry, I got it." But deep down, David was tired. He was missing his own appointments to help others with theirs. Missing meals, missing sleep. When he finally drew the line and started saying, "I'm sorry, I can't today," the backlash was immediate. One coworker snapped, "Wow, you've changed." A family member muttered, "You're not as generous as you used to be." But David stayed firm. And for the first time in years, he felt peace. He realized something profound. It wasn't that others had taken his power. He had given it away piece by piece in the name of being kind. But kindness shouldn't come at the cost of your identity. And the moment he stopped performing, he remembered who he was. You see, when you stop trying to please everyone, You regain something priceless: freedom. The freedom to think your own thoughts, to make your own choices, to say yes when you mean it and no when you don't. That freedom is not selfish. It's sacred. And what follows that freedom? Clarity. You begin to notice how foggy things were before. The constant second-guessing, the late-night worry, the guilt over whether you upset someone by telling the truth. It's exhausting, isn't it? That fog creeps in so slowly, you hardly realize it's there. Until one day, you say no, and suddenly, your mind is quiet. There was a woman named Sarah. She was the one people leaned on during every family crisis, every emotional breakdown. She was always listening, always present. But she started noticing something. She was forgetting what she wanted. She couldn't even answer simple questions anymore, like, "What do you need today?" Because she had spent so long answering everyone else's. One afternoon, she sat alone in her living room and turned her phone off. Just for an hour. And in that silence, something remarkable happened. She didn't feel lonely. She felt still. And that stillness, that quiet, was the first sign that she was coming home to herself. That's what clarity looks like. It's not just mental peace. It's knowing your own voice again. It's feeling the weight lift when you stop apologizing for taking care of yourself. It's realizing that not every text needs an instant reply. Not every favor needs to be accepted. And not every relationship deserves unlimited access to your time. So, here we are. We've seen what begins to unfold when you stop being nice to the wrong people. You see who they really are. You take back your power. And you begin to hear your own thoughts again. It's a process. It takes courage. But the peace it brings is worth everything. Let's keep going. And as we continue this journey, something remarkable begins to grow from that peace. Your sense of self-respect. For many of us, especially those of us in the later chapters of life, self-respect can feel like something we quietly gave up long ago, almost without noticing. We put others first. We made sacrifices for the greater good. We told ourselves that being humble meant staying silent. But after a while, that silence begins to sound a lot like forgetting who you are. You see, when you've spent years saying yes to keep the peace, you don't just lose time, you start to lose the parts of yourself that once stood tall. That voice inside you that used to say, "I matter too," gets quieter and quieter, until one day you stop listening altogether. And that's when the real damage begins. Not just in relationships, but in how you see yourself. Every time you ignore your own needs, your self-worth takes a little hit. It doesn't shout, it erodes, like a wave slowly wearing down a stone. But here's the beautiful part. The moment you stop giving yourself away to keep others comfortable, your self-respect begins to return. It's subtle at first. You might find yourself saying, "I'm not available right now." And instead of guilt, you feel relief. Or you might finally tell someone, kindly but clearly, "That doesn't work for me." And instead of fearing their response, you feel stronger for having said it. Mark, a man I deeply admire, told me something I'll never forget. For most of his life, he was the fixer, the dependable one. He wore that title like a badge of honor. But as time went on, he realized that being the one who always helps had become his identity, and it was exhausting. He started asking himself, who shows up for me the way I show up for them? And the answer wasn't easy to face. Not many. That realization was a turning point. He began to step back, not to punish anyone, but to check in with himself. He didn't stop caring. He just stopped overextending. He stopped fixing what wasn't his to fix. And yes, it made some people uncomfortable. A few even accused him of being selfish. But Mark told me, I've never felt more like myself. He wasn't shrinking anymore. He was standing tall, not in anger, but in quiet dignity. And that's the thing about self-respect. It doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't need to. It shows up in how you walk, how you speak, and the peace you carry when you no longer need to prove your worth to anyone. But let's be honest, not everyone will be happy with this version of you, especially the people who were quietly benefiting from the old version, the one who never said no. When you begin to shift, they feel it. And for some, it's a threat. That's when you'll start seeing a different kind of reaction. Not just disappointment or distance, but manipulation. They might try to guilt you back into compliance. "You've changed," they'll say. "I guess you don't care anymore." Or they might flip the script, pretending to suddenly value your space, your feelings, your boundaries, just enough to get things back to how they were. But nothing's really changed. Because for some people, it was never about the relationship. It was about what the relationship gave them. When that access is cut off, they don't miss you. They miss the benefits. Amanda, someone I met through a community group, experienced this firsthand. She had a friend who leaned on her heavily, emotionally, practically, even financially. But the friendship was one-sided. When Amanda needed help, that same friend was nowhere to be found. Still, Amanda stayed quiet. Until one day, she didn't. She began to say, "I can't talk right now," or "I'm not able to do that this week." And just like that, the dynamic shifted. The friend's warmth turned cold. Then came the guilt trips. "I guess I don't matter to you anymore." Then the charm returned. "I miss how we used to be." But Amanda had learned something powerful. It wasn't growth. It was strategy. And she wasn't going to be manipulated back into a place that drained her. So she stood her ground. And while it was hard, what she gained was worth it. Because every time she said no to manipulation, she was saying yes to her peace. And that peace? It wasn't just quiet. It was clarity. It was the sound of finally choosing herself. You may have noticed by now that this shift, this journey of stepping away from the wrong people, can sometimes feel lonely. It's like cleaning out a cluttered room. At first, there's just space, emptiness. You might wonder, did I make a mistake? Or, what if I end up alone? But here's what I promise you. That space you create doesn't stay empty for long. It becomes a doorway. Because once you stop allowing in the wrong people, you make room for the right ones. People who don't need to be convinced of your worth. People who respect your boundaries without being asked. People who show up not because they want something, but because they genuinely care. Jake, a retired teacher I once had coffee with, told me a story that stayed with me. For years, he was everyone's helper. He drove people to appointments, loaned money, took calls at all hours. But when he faced a personal health scare, the silence was deafening. The people he'd given so much to, nowhere. So he stepped back, not with drama, just quiet distance. And over time, something unexpected happened. New people began to enter his life. A neighbor who checked in after seeing the porch light hadn't been on. A fellow church member who brought over a casserole just because. Jake didn't have a larger circle, but he had a stronger one. And in that strength, he found joy again. That's what happens when you stop giving your energy to the wrong people. You create space. And in that space, something better can grow. Real connection. Not pressure, not obligation, but peace. Let's keep going. And here's the part that often surprises people the most. Your energy begins to shift. Not just the physical kind, though that may happen too. I'm talking about a deeper energy, the kind that affects how you show up in the world. The kind that determines whether you wake up feeling grounded or drained before your feet even touch the floor. When you've been overly nice to the wrong people for too long, your energy gets scattered. It's as if every yes you didn't mean chips away at your inner strength. You may find yourself forgetting things more often, struggling to focus, or feeling unmotivated even when there's nothing wrong on the surface. That's because your emotional energy, the fuel behind your focus, joy, and clarity, has been leaking. Melissa, a woman I deeply respect, once shared how this played out in her life. On the outside, she looked like the dependable one, always organizing the family get-togethers, staying late at work to cover someone else's shift, hosting every birthday party even when she was exhausted. People loved her for it, but no one ever asked if she had the time, the strength, or even the desire. One day, Melissa hit a wall. Her doctor told her she was dealing with chronic stress, not because of a major trauma, but because of a lifetime of micro-sacrifices. That day, she made a quiet promise to herself. I will still care, but I will care for me too. And that simple shift changed everything. She began saying no, not with anger, but with calm confidence. She stopped explaining every decision, stopped picking up every call. And almost like magic, her energy started coming back. She began walking in the mornings again. She rediscovered a love for painting. She stopped feeling exhausted just from existing. That's the power of protecting your energy. When you stop handing it out to people who take without giving, it comes back to you tenfold. And you don't need to do something dramatic to begin this process. You don't need to cut everyone off or make grand declarations. Often it starts with a single quiet decision: to stop doing what drains you, to notice how your body tenses around certain people, to pause before saying yes and ask yourself, do I really want to do this? Because when you choose yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom, your energy shifts from being scattered and spent to being focused and full. And that kind of energy, it's magnetic. It draws in the right people, the right opportunities, and most importantly, the right peace. Now I want to leave you with this. So many of us have lived lives centered around giving, and that is beautiful. But giving should not mean disappearing. Caring should not mean collapsing. You were not born to be everyone's solution at the cost of your own well-being. You have the right to take up space, to say no, to be loved for who you are, not just for what you do for others. There's a kind of quiet strength that comes with this shift. It's not loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It lives in your posture, your decisions, the gentle way you say, "That doesn't work for me," and move on without guilt. It lives in how you wake up in the morning and don't dread the day ahead, because it no longer belongs to everyone else. It belongs to you again. You may have been told that it's too late to change, that by this age people don't listen or don't grow. But that's simply not true. In fact, there's something powerful about making these changes later in life. You've seen enough to know what matters. You've felt enough to know what hurts. And now, you're finally ready to live in a way that honors who you are, not who others want you to be. So here's what I hope you remember. When you stop being nice to the wrong people, you're not becoming bitter. You're becoming clear. You're not losing love. You're making room for real love to find you. And you're not walking away from people. You're walking back to yourself. Your story isn't over. In fact, it may just be starting in the most authentic, peaceful, beautiful way yet. Keep going. Keep trusting your gut. Keep choosing your peace. Because you deserve a life that feels like yours, not just one that keeps others happy. Let's keep going. And so we arrive at something both powerful and gentle. The truth that by releasing what weighs you down, you open your arms to what lifts you up. You see, when you stop being overly nice to the wrong people, something unexpected begins to happen. You create space. Not just any space, but space for genuine connection, for honest joy, for relationships that don't demand a mask or a performance. At first, this space can feel uncomfortable. There's a strange stillness to it, like walking into a quiet room after years of noise. You might even ask yourself, did I make a mistake? Or have I pushed too many people away? But give that silence time. Don't rush to fill it. Because in that quiet, the truth starts to echo. It was never about how many people surrounded you. It was about who really saw you, who truly cared. There's a man I know. His name is Jake. For decades, Jake was what you might call a go-to guy. Always saying yes, always driving across town to help, always loaning tools, time or money, no questions asked. People liked him. They leaned on him. But when Jake went through a rough patch, health issues, some financial stress, he noticed something that stung more than he expected. The phone stopped ringing. The people he'd bent over backwards for? Nowhere to be found. So Jake did something quietly brave. He stopped reaching out. He didn't announce it, didn't complain. He just stepped back. And the space that opened up felt huge, almost like a canyon. But little by little, that canyon began to fill, not with the old noise, but with something far better. New people began to enter his life. Not flashy, not fast, but real. A neighbor who dropped off dinner without being asked. A church friend who checked in after a long absence. A cousin he hadn't spoken to in years, who called just to say he'd been thinking of him. These weren't loud gestures. They were steady ones, genuine. And Jake said to me once, "I used to be proud of my full calendar. Now I'm proud of the peace I feel around the people who are still here." When you let go of relationships built on obligation or convenience, you make room for those built on mutual respect and warmth. You start recognizing who comes not for what you can give, but simply to walk beside you. These people might not show up in droves, but when they do, you'll feel it in your heart. They'll ask how you are, not what you can do for them. They'll listen more than they talk. They'll stay when things aren't easy. And here's the most beautiful part of this journey. Something shifts not just in your relationships, but in you. That aching feeling of being stretched thin, of being invisible, of being taken for granted. It starts to fade. In its place, something new grows. A sense of quiet confidence, an inner calm, a knowing that your worth has never been tied to how much you give or how often you say yes. Your worth simply is. You begin to walk through the world differently, with more ease. You laugh more often, even if it's just to yourself. You stop rushing to answer every call. You notice the warmth of the sun on your back, the smell of coffee in the morning, the small joys that were always there, waiting for you to slow down enough to feel them. Melissa, who I mentioned earlier, told me something after she'd been living this new way for a while. She said, "I'm not trying to be liked anymore. I'm trying to be well." And isn't that a powerful shift? So many of us spend years, or even decades, bending into shapes that don't fit us, just to be accepted. But when you finally stop twisting yourself to keep others comfortable, you discover a kind of freedom you can't put a price on. And here's the last truth I want to share with you today. The version of you that used to overgive, over-apologize, overthink, that version did their best. There's no shame in that. That version got you here. But now you're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to grow into someone who chooses peace over pleasing. Someone who trusts themselves enough to walk away from what no longer serves them. Someone who sees clearly, gives generously, but only when it feels right in the soul. So if you've ever felt tired, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, take that feeling seriously. Not as a weakness, but as a message. Your spirit is trying to tell you, it's time. Time to stop being nice to the wrong people. Time to come home to yourself. And as you do, may you find that you are not alone. There are others on this path, quiet, steady souls just like you, who are done with the noise and ready for the kind of life that brings real joy. Keep moving toward that life. Keep saying no to what drains you, and yes to what heals you. Because this next chapter, it's yours. And it might just be the most honest, most peaceful, most powerful one yet. Thank you for being here with me. If this message spoke to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Your story, your thoughts, they matter more than you know. If you found value in this, please give it a like and subscribe. It helps more than you think and keeps this little space growing strong. Until next time, be kind to yourself. Choose peace. And remember, you're not too old to start living for you.